Surprise! We're back on the same Friday recording this. This will probably be posted after Friday, though. But you can tell we have not changed our clothes, so it is the same day/night. And
Unless we just wear the same clothes on multiple days with the same hairstyles.
And so we decided we wanted to do this bonus review of a game since we were talking about Coup last, a really solid filler game that I gave a 7, John gave a 7.5. And part of my reason was because I told him later, I think there are a couple filler games I might like more than Coup. Not to get up to an 8, but probably to that 7.5. And like really small spoiler, one of those games is
I didn't get a background for the mind. The mind!
The Mind. You can still put the background if you want. So The Mind is a game by Wolfgang Warsch for 2 to 4 players, plays in about, the box says 20 minutes. That seems about right once you know how it goes. It can even be, 20 minutes actually is about right for how many levels there are. And so The Mind came out just maybe, a couple years ago? Where does it say on the box?
Mm-hmm. I think it's 2018.
Yeah, I think so. And it was, I think, up for the Game of the Year, I think. And that was around when Wolfgang Warsch was kind of becoming a bigger name in the board game world. He's had maybe like just a handful of games that have all done very well, all different styles of games. And so there you go, The Mind with its cards. And so yeah, it's in this small box, filler game, 2 to 4 players, and it's cooperative. And it's one of those interesting cooperative games like that kind of follow in suit of Hanabi, which we haven't talked about, but we probably will in the future. That is cooperative, but there is limited to no communication. And so that's the challenge of having it be a co-op game. But it is just, the box just comes with cards. There are some cards to mark how many lives your team has, basically how many mistakes you can make before your game is over, and cards to indicate what level you're on. Basically, you need to play through a certain number of levels depending on how many players you have. And the whole rest of the cards are basically these cards, very simple cards, numbered 1 through 100. And so for those of you who haven't played before, it's really simple. For each level, each person is dealt out cards from the number card deck equal to the level number. So if you're starting at level 1, everyone starts with 1 card in hand. Level 2, everyone starts with 2 cards in hand. And so the point of the game is to get through the last level. And to get through each level, say level 1, you all have 1 card, say 3 of us playing, and we all have 1 card. You guys have to play your cards in ascending order. Basically, one of you has to play the card that's the lowest out of all 3 of you, then the second highest, then the highest. And so it sounds simple, right? But the main point is that there's no communication. So you just have to play when you think you should play. And if you're wrong, your team loses a life. And if you lost all your lives, your game is over. If you succeed in playing all the cards out, then you go on to the next level. Like I said, level 2, 2 cards for each player. Then you have to play them in ascending order again, all 6 cards to get to the next level. And then the last thing is there is this kind of shuriken. I mean, the theme is really random in this game. The shuriken card, which is an item that you can kind of agree to use as a team by raising your hand. Since there's no talking, you just raise your hand to say, we think we should use it. If everyone raises their hand at the same time, that means you agree to use it. And that lets everyone discard the lowest card from their hand. And that kind of just helps kind of clean out some cards, right? So then you can maybe have the rest of your cards that are easier to play in order. And that's basically the game. That's the whole game. It sounds really abstract, which it technically is, right? The theme doesn't matter. So it is this abstract game of cooperatively playing cards in order, which is such a kind of lame way of describing it, but that is the whole game. But before we continue, we do want to first say our scores. right? To give you an idea of what we think of this. And so, like I already kind of mentioned,
Yep.
the Mind is probably the filler game I love to play. And so for me, it is a 7.5, as I will share on my BGG page. So it is a 7.5 for me, 7 average among everyone on BGG. And John, what about you?
And for me, I actually am more along the 7 across the board, and it's
how dare you?
As we mentioned before in the previous video from today on coup, we kind of had a reversal, right? Where for me, I had coup up as a 7.5, instead of 7. But I think, as we can see, the average board game geek scoring is at a 7, so we're still within that range of thought process. It's not a bad game by any means, right? It's still clearly within that space that it's supposed to fit.
And so the reason why we wanted to actually give that little introduction of the rules and our scores first is because now we are going into spoiler territory.
Alert.
Adobe stock, spoiler alert, spoiler alert.
Numbers.
Hopefully we're chanting enough so you know there's a spoiler alert, because we are going to talk spoilers for the game. But the interesting thing is, don't worry, it's not story spoilers because it's a filler small game. There is no story. But after discussing a little bit before recording this, we thought it made sense to still have this spoiler alert, because as we talk about our experiences with it, it is something that might be a little spoilery for your experience of the game. Because when describing it to people, you can just leave that there. This is all spoilers now.
I just wanted it to flash so that it made people aware that, hey, it is a spoiler.
Make it aware that Adobe stock photos is...
And Adobe. Representation, there you go, Adobe. Watermarked.
But yeah, the spoiler that we're going to talk about is from our experiences of the game, because I do basically always tell people that the Mind is a game to experience, which is always a little weird for me to say, because I obviously like board games because of the mechanics, how well it plays together. But the Mind definitely has that sense of something you experience to understand why it's so captivating and why you want to keep playing a game where you're not talking and staring at each other and playing cards in numerical order. So there, you have been alerted of the spoilers.
We have alerted you. This good, 2 minutes long of spoiler alertingness.
Hopefully it's clear now. Spoiler alert. Okay, John.
Cool.
You want to start?
So moving into experiences of the game and such. I remember, Ben, you introduced me to playing the Mind in the first place, and I think the experience really is very unique. So as we mentioned, there are some other co-op games that have the quiet, no talking aspects of the game. But in a lot of those games, you still have there is other mediums of communication that are happening. So I think notably we were talking about Hanabi, and you do get information from seeing other players for the most part, right? The only person that you're effectively don't have information is your own self for the most part. And you're kind of figuring out what you have, so on and so forth. Not a review of Hanabi, but that's typically what happens. The thing about this game is really the only information you have is your own information. And then whatever card has been played, that's it. You have no other information, and there's no other form of communication to get. It's a very different experience than Hanabi is, because in this point, it's pretty much when a card is played, a card is played. You can't do anything about the card played once it's played, right? You can't, there's no take backsies, there's none of that. It's just played, and then based on, as we were saying, in ascending order, it's just the card that's played. And so it delves into some of the expectations you get out of this game, where there's a lot of this focus on starting to learn how to be of one mind with the other players. And it's a really interesting kind of concept that starts coming out as you start experiencing the game, and you start kind of picking up on the way that people think, actually, right? And the way that people are looking at this game, right? A very simple game, but you also, in a weird way, you kind of start getting this pickup of how people count, how people feel about playing cards. So
Yeah, I think so. One of the parts of the rules that I think people always end up asking is like, okay, when do we play our cards? And this is also a big way that it's different from most card games, including Hanabi, where there is no turn order in this game. So like, it's not like usual games like Uno or pure card games, Hanabi, where you're taking a turn to get information or play a card. It's literally, you need to play collectively your cards in ascending order, and you play them when you think you should play them.
yep.
And I think that's so funny, because when clarifying that for people and you start playing, you just like looking, you hold your hand of cards, and then you're like staring at each other to see who's gonna go. And it's hilarious. I think that's like part of like when teaching and introing the game, one of the funniest moments, because I remember doing this with our friend Melissa and Albert. Shout outs to them. And I brought this with me when we just went to go eat like at a Koja kitchen or something. And we were at the table.
Shout out Koja Kitchen.
We ate, and then we decided to try it. And we are just these three young adults, quiet, like silently staring at each other, holding cards. And I was like imagining like the people working there were probably like, what the heck are these people doing? Like just holding cards, looking back and forth, not saying anything, and then slowly play a card. And that's like what we kept doing. Oh, it's so funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, about what you were saying though, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is kind of this interesting idea with the game then, that really is each person's experience of the game, right? Like how they see the game, right? How should I be playing my cards? Obviously, we want to do ascending, but how soon do I want to play my cards, right?
Mm-hmm.
One rule I also did forget to mention. I was trying to briefly see if it actually is written in the rules, which I'm not seeing right now. Really small rules, just this leaflet. But I thought it was in the rules, because I did see them teach it in the Board Game Geek video, their gameplay video of it that I originally saw, where there's no communication except, like I mentioned, the shuriken, where you can raise your hand to say you want to use it. And the other thing is, at any time, a player can put their hand on the table in front of them and say, stop. Oh, actually, no, you don't say anything, do you?
I think you do. I think. Oh wait, no, you don't.
No.
You don't.
Yeah, you don't say anything. So
the action of putting your hand on the table signifies.
Yeah, you put your hand on the table, and that means everyone else needs to put a hand on the table, and it's basically a way to have everyone stop for the moment and not play any cards. And it's basically like a pause. And I remember when teaching that too, people are like, "What's the point of that?" And it's like it's so important later once you know how to play, right? Once your whole group is familiar together playing it, then you find this point of like taking a breath to kind of regather yourselves, to recollect yourselves, and then lift your hand and keep playing. That helps a lot, because one of the main things that the main spoiler I would say that we were alerting to was actually written in the rules itself. There's a part saying don't read the end of this rules until you play the game once. And so the spoiler is that it just explains that the game is a game about timing and pacing. And I think that's really cool. And obviously you could have realized that yourself, but it's cool that they kind of just explain that a bit, because it helps with your strategy for the game. But again, it's not like a sure way to win the game spoiler, you know? But it's just clarifying that because there's no turn order and you want to work together to play the cards in descending order, it really comes down to how in sync all the players are with their conception of timing, right? Like if one person kind of in their own mind or kind of their own internal clock kind of is one who rushes, then sitting there for a little bit, they might think like, oh, like I should be playing like the 30 now. But then for someone else, they might be like, oh, we've just been waiting for like 5 seconds, so maybe like I should play my 10, you know? And so that I think is so brilliant. And part of why it's a game to experience, because then you really do strive to become one mind and adjust your pacing to work with the people you're playing with. I don't know if you had something to say on that.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the part that's very unique about this game. And this actually kind of gets into a little bit of my rating at some point, or as well, as we'll maybe move into. But I think when you play this game with new people, or people haven't played this game before, like it's kind of figuring that out. So as a person who's already played the game and already experienced at that point, what kind of you come into the game thinking of is, how are we going to figure out our timing together as a team? Or like, what is everybody else's timing like? So then I can kind of adjust and learn, right? What their timing is like, and then hopefully they'll be able to match what my timing is like too, right? As we play the game. And I think that's the part that kind of makes it unique every time you have new players or different players in this game experience, is because when you're adding new elements, or like kind of the adding of the new elements in this game is the players themselves. So by playing this game with different players, that is what makes this game replayable, I think, in all honesty, right? Like that's what really gives it a lot of the replay value here, because otherwise it's like literally the same game, playing numbers 1 through 100, trying to get to the final level, right? But that is kind of where the variety comes in, and where it can be played with a lot of different groups, a lot of different people. But that's also where my rating doesn't put it at 7.5 and more of a 7 for me, in my opinion, is more because if you've already played this game with kind of the same set of players, in my opinion, it's more of a, I don't know if I'd really want to keep playing this like as a filler type game with this same group of people over and over, right? Versus maybe some other filler games, which is why for me, like I had Coup as the filler higher than this, because for Coup, I do feel like I can play that game a lot of different times, even if I have the same base of players. But with this game, to me, once that experience is kind of had with that base set of players, that's all you get. Now, that also goes into a little bit, though. We've actually created some house rules within our gameplay, because there are some breaking strategies to this game, especially when you get to the higher levels, that let you kind of pass through it, because you can manipulate the way the rules work, all right? So one of the rules in the game is, as long as you play a higher card, you have to discard all the cards that are lower than it. So, of course, us min-maxing gamers and people who do this a lot would be like, well, if someone has 100 or the highest number card, if you just play that card, you get to pass through the level right away, right?
Because you only lose one life.
Because you only lose one life for it, and you basically discard every card, which means you can pass a level for one life. Easy, no problem. So to get around that, though, the people that I played with, what we made as our house rule is, if someone plays the 100 first, you have to play from 100 counting down. So you're basically playing reverse order at that point. So that it prevents people from doing the game break. And then you have to kind of flip your mind, because now you're like, wait, we're playing in descending order now, not ascending order. So it kind of helps keep the game fresh, or keep the game as an actual game, versus something you can just break to win to get to the final level.
And actually, it's good that you mentioned that way to game the game, because I think even another way to kind of fix that, which maybe like I would suggest they do in the rules in future printings anyway, right, is maybe even that rule of like, if someone plays a number out of order, right, like a higher one, and there's ones that other players had that were in between, that you lose a life for every card in between, every card that you skipped.
That one, that is a little tough in this game, because especially when you get to the higher levels, there is like a point where people get a lot of cards, and sometimes there is like a difference between like 3 or 4 numbers, and then somebody might have all those 3 or 4 numbers that get played. So you lose 3 or 4 lives right away, which I think that was what they were balancing around, because it's like, we don't want people to lose too many lives and punish them for like a number off and lose 2 lives for that.
But I do think that is like, I think if I understand the situation you're describing too, I think that is part of the risk reward like thrill of the game, right? Like those cases where you don't think it's going to happen, but it happens really often, that you and someone else have like consecutive numbers, right? And so you're
46,
just like
47, 48.
Yeah, who's gonna go first? And then you play one, and then that person like immediately plays the number up. You're like,
but then you have the one right above it, so you're like, wait, I need to play this one immediately, because
you don't want to forget that.
It's almost a feeling of, what are the chances that you're gonna have that other number before That one.
Yes.
Actually,
And actually, those cases are also when the putting your hand on the table makes a difference, right?
mhm.
Where like all your internal clocks are maybe kind of synced up, and you're getting to that range where it's like, okay, it's time to play like 20, but then you don't know if you should play your 19, or they actually have the 20, or they have 18, or if you have 20 and then do they have 21, or if I have 21, do they have 20? And so it's like, then you put a hand down, everyone puts a hand down, and you're like, take a breath. I mean, not saying this, but it's kind of the point of the rule.
The concept,
take a breath and kind of try to resync your time to see who should actually be going without talking.
Yeah.
Always
Yeah.
the without talking. And so, yeah, I think, so for me, I think actually when you mentioned the whole idea of new players making it replayable, I do find it kind of charming, the idea of maybe playing the mind with people you played with before but haven't in a while. And like, I just thought about this, like with some of our friends, it'd be an interesting way to just, in a way, like catch up and see how each person's doing. It's like,
sync.
it's like we've been in lockdown, right? What if we hang out after this and play the mind, and then it's like, whoa, you seem to be going really fast. Like, are you anxious about something? Like, I think that'd be hilarious and charming that a game
So now
could
Ben is using
do that.
this as a psychology
Yeah,
experiment,
exactly.
getting into your brain.
But it does do that, right? It does have that sense again of the pacing, right? Like I remember playing with one of the youth group high schoolers, teaching it to him, and I was playing with someone else I had played with before, so maybe like 3 of us. One of them was new, the high schooler, and the high schooler like played a high card like immediately, like a 20 or 30, and we're like, what are you doing? We just started the game. It's been like a couple seconds. And it's like, it's just interesting because it tells you something about the person, right? Not about being bad at games or anything like that, but like a young person, right? Who's maybe has that energy or that kind of way of approaching things that they're just going to go at it fast, right? That's what it seems like it should be. And so it's just, I do find that kind of, that psychology of the game really interesting.
Or it's even the gauge of what is considered a difference in numbers, right? Like as you were just mentioning, it's not even like that might not even just be a thing of speed. It could just be a thing of thinking of the range of numbers between 1 through 100. And like, let's say it's the beginning of the game when you guys were first starting, thinking, oh, well, 20 is a pretty low number. So it's I should probably just play this number right away. But then it's also that mindset of, by kind of being open to the risk, but also with the idea of like, oh, it doesn't seem like a big number, or it seems pretty close to the low number, versus some other people might be like, oh, 20 is very far away from 1. So maybe I should give it a few seconds, right? Or give it a little bit of time first to see what people decide to play first, right?
Yeah, so like there are those kind of situations too that I also kind of had to clarify or even sometimes like discourage so it doesn't ruin your experience of the game. Like one of the cases is what you're describing of people kind of going at it like statistically, right? Where I mean, I think you will be surprised at how often it comes up, those scenarios we talked about. It's like, what are the chances that you have the number right after me? It's happened a lot, like a lot more than you might think. And so I think some people I have played initially, they went about it statistically. It's like, you shouldn't do that, like unless it's very much like you have the 100, so every card is lower than yours. That's like maybe like the only like guaranteed case, right? But otherwise, like you really should focus more on your timing and pacing with the other players versus just thinking I have good chances of having a higher card, because it's not poker or something like that where you're actually trying to bank on that, right? It's kind of in a way like a small like a, how do I say it, not a race, like a marathon. Is that what people would say? It's like
not a sprint, it's a marathon.
You need to go through these steps to get through each level that's progressively has more cards and longer. So you need to like be smart about it and not just think like it's something we just constantly rush through and rely on statistics to get us through. And so then the second case, though, I would mention is when a group of friends of ours, they thought it was so smart that they would just count their heartbeats or like pulse at the same time in their head. So it's always like 1, to like 1 second at a time, 1 second increments. And so if we're all counting at the same time, then we know which numbers should be played when, you know? And they felt really accomplished for getting really far and even beating it that way. And it's like, that defeats the point of the game if you're strategizing to say the whole game is counting in your head at the same pace, you know? And so that is something I also would like discourage from doing, because I think that can kind of mess up your view of what the mind can be like if you're just approaching it like very mechanically that way.
And that's the thing why you shouldn't be communicating, right? And that's what we said, and that's actually part of the rules. You should not be communicating to each other at all throughout the entirety of playing the game until technically you're over. Obviously that's kind of where you get in, like, once you finish a game, people talk about the game. Then if they create strategies of like, hey, we should count at this pacing of 1, 2, 3, or whatever, right? It sounds like they use like heartbeat pulses, which I thought was funny, because like, what if somebody has like a faster beating heart than the other person? Does it actually work?
Excited during it,
right? Which I could see how that might mess up, but that kind of also is breaking the spirit of the game, right? The game, like, if they wanted you to count like that as a part of the mechanic, they would have put something into the game. So it does kind of break that spirit. Now, there is a way to conquer that, though, is if you play with another variant that I believe is an official variant in the game, which is you don't reveal cards as you play them until all the cards are played. And then you flip over the deck and then just check through the deck. And then in that case, I believe you do count every single time it's an error, right? Because it's all face down.
Okay.
Right. So I think in that variant, because that is the hard mode variant of this game, where they basically say if you have beaten this game with your group or whatever, then you should try playing this game, and rather than showing cards face up as you're playing the cards, all of the cards are face down when you play them, and then see where you go. Another house rule variant that my friends and I played with is if you make one mistake, you lose your life and you restart the round, actually. So you still play face up, but if you mess up, you have to start the round over. So then you can't continue from where you're at. You have to start it over, and you have to perfect round it to get through. So that's another variant of the game, and I think that adds more replayability in a way that gets people more like, we got to get this sync. We got to get ourselves together, right? And even if they created these strategies to beat the game, that would definitely make the game a lot harder, because even one mistake would make you reset, or you can't see if someone made a mistake, right? So there are ways you can even fudge this game a little bit with these little side house rules that still keep the spirit of the game and give it some, fun alternatives. Again, don't do any of those house ruling things, I think, until you've learned the game or until you've played the game a few times.
And especially if you jumped into this part of the video and heard all this spoiler talk without knowing it's spoiler talk, we would say to experience the game first without knowing any of this, just knowing the rules. As boring as it sounds, it's very interesting to figure out when you're actually playing. And so with that, that's why, all of this is why it's my favorite filler. I would say one of my favorite fillers. So 7.5 from me, 7 from John.
7 from me.
You guys can check it out. Hopefully it's very cheap. It's like $10, maybe 12 or something like that.
Shipping maybe cost.
And it's available at Target, so it did make it mainstream. So very easy to get, and Amazon,
or whatever other online stores you use.
Yeah, it'll all be around that price. So very cheap, very good game. I definitely recommend it as a filler game. And so thanks for watching and listening. If you found this helpful, hope you can check out the game soon, and hope you'll let your friends also know, share this with them. And until then, thanks for watching. See you next time.
See you next time.